Welcome to day 2 of our circle equations. We have for some real numbers d, e, and f, the equation x squared plus y squared plus dx plus ey plus f is equal to 0 can have a graph that will be a circle, a point, or even non-existent. The way you determine it is based off of your radius squared. So here, for non-existent, your radius squared will be less than 0. So when it's negative, it's non-existent. For it to be a circle, your radius squared would need to be greater than 0. And lastly, we have for a point, your radius squared should be equal to 0. All right, so now we're going to do a few problems practicing our completing the square that we have learned in the previous lesson. So starting off for number 1, we have show that x squared minus 6x plus y squared plus 10y plus 18 is equal to 0, has a circle as its graph. We're going to find the center, the radius, and then sketch the graph. All right, so let's look at what we have here, and let's recall some of those steps that we gave you. Remember, step 1 is to divide by the coefficient for your quadratic, your x squared and y squared. Here we have 1, and so we don't need to worry about that step. It's only when it is greater than 1. So we're going to move into step 2 with that being said. And step 2 is just telling you to group your x's together, your y's together, and then to write your constants on the other side. So I'm going to rewrite this with that in mind. And really the only thing I need to change here is I am going to subtract that 18 from both sides so that my constant is on the right side. Okay, from there, we're going to move into our step 3, which is where we will take half the coefficient of our x and our y, and we're going to square them and add them to both sides. So I'm going to write this in black. This is not a necessary step you have to show, but it's going to help for some of you visually see where we're getting the numbers we're getting. All right, so here we'll have that x squared minus 6x, okay, plus, and like I said, we are going to take half of that coefficient, so negative 6 divided by 2, and then we're going to square it. Then we're going to do the same thing for our y's. So I'm going to take half of that 10, and I'm going to square it. Now, the key thing is when you are completing the square, make sure you are adding that to both sides to keep your equation equal. So I'm going to come over here and do the same thing. Okay, and the reason why I like to kind of draw those lines underneath is because when I take a step back and I look at it, I'm just going to double check that, I have that same thing on both sides. So here I have my negative 6 being divided by 2 and squared. And then I have my 10s being divided by 2 and squared. So my equation is still equal. And once again, you don't necessarily have to show that step, but for some of you, it might be helpful. I'm going to go ahead and work through, and this would be a step that I would want to see here of that x squared minus your 6x plus, here we're going to get 9 because negative 6 divided by 2 gives you that negative 3. And when you're squaring, you should always be adding because the negative squared would be a positive and a positive squared would still be a positive. Okay, and then over here, I'm going to add 25. And doing the same thing on the other side. All right, so once we have completed that step, then we are going to move into our step 4, where we are factoring our trinomial and combining our like terms. All right, and to do that, all we really need to do is look at the coefficients for our x's and our y's once again. And we are just going to take half of them to come up with our factors. So here, when we look at our x squared minus 6x plus 9, okay, and we're trying to figure out how to factor that, you can sit there and you can think about like what times what will give me 9, but we'll add up to that negative 6. But the easiest way to get your factors is just to look at that negative 6 and divide by 2. So here we would have x minus 3 squared. Then we would do the same thing with our y's, but here we're going to look at that coefficient for our y here. And that's going to tell us that half of that 10 is 5. And so we would have y plus 5 squared. And then combine your like terms on the right side to get 16. Okay, so once again, the quickest way to figuring out your factors is just by looking at the coefficient for your x and taking half of that. And then looking at the coefficient for your y and taking half of that. Okay, so now that we've done this, we are going to actually find what they're looking for, which is to determine your center and your radius. Okay, so here my center, we would look at our h and our k, and we would get positive 3 with a negative 5 for my y, or my k. And then for my radius, we would take that square root of 16 to get that my radius here is going to be 4. Okay, and so now that we know this, we can come over to our graph and we can plot this. So we would have that positive 3. So right 3 and then negative 5, so down 5. Okay, and then using that radius of 4, I'm just going to go up, down, left, and right 4 to plot some points for my circle. All right, and once you've done that, you can draw your circle. I'm going to go ahead and just pause the video real quick and create a circle. All right, so there you have it. That's going to be my circle when I connect those 4 points that I plotted for the radius. All right, now let's look at question number 2. And we have show that 2x squared plus 2y squared minus 6x plus 10y equals to 1 is going to have a circle, as its graph. All right, so we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous one. We are going to follow through those steps of completing our square, and then once we have that, we can find our center, our radius, and we can then plot it on the graph. So let's start off with our step 1 this time, because step 1 here does apply, which is for you to divide by the coefficient for your quadratic. Here I notice that I have that 2 in front of my x and my y squared. So I'm going to start off by taking every single one of these terms and dividing by 2. I'm also going to go ahead and jump into doing step 2 of grouping as well. And the one key thing that a lot of y'all had asked about in class is just, do I divide the 1 by 2? And yes, you do. Every single term that you have should be divided by the 2 from your quadratic. All right, now we can move into the step that, like I said, I like to show you just so that you can see where I'm getting everything from, but that you do not need to do. So that's going to be me going through and just taking half and squaring the coefficient for my x, my y. So let me write it out real quick. All right. So once again, remember what you're doing is you're taking half the coefficient. So that -3, I'm going to take half of it, and then I'm going to square it. Then I'm going to do the same for the y coefficient. We'll have that 5 divided by 2, and then we're going to square it. And to make sure that you have an equal equation, you know, it's not off balanced, make sure you are doing that same thing to the other side. Okay, and then, like I said, you don't have to show this step. It's just so y'all can see visually where I'm getting them. But I do like to underline them just to make sure, looking at it one more time before I move on, do I have the same thing being added to both sides to keep it equal? All right, since I do, let's go ahead and move into taking half of it and squaring it. And so we are going to get x squared minus 3x plus, and I would highly suggest you leave this as a fraction instead of trying to convert into the decimal, just because it's a little bit easier to square since all I have to worry about is squaring the numerator and the denominator. So -3 squared gives me 9, and then 2 squared will give me 4. And then doing that same thing over here, 5 squared will give me 25 over that 4 when we have 2 squared. All right, so this is what we're going to get when we complete the square. Now let's go ahead and write it as our factors, and then combine our like terms on the right side. So once again, like the previous one, don't freak out. I know, you have that odd number and everything, and we've got those fractions in there, but all you need to do to figure out your factors is look at your x and look at your y. You are going to take half of them, and that will give you your factors. So here I'll have x, and then I've got that -3. Half of that is just 3/2. Okay, so then moving into my y, we're going to take half of that 5, and you get 5/2. Now, when it does come to the the right side, where we are going to have to add, this is the part that will throw some of you off, but we just need to go back to our basics. So I'm going to do a little bit of scratch work over here. Okay, I'm going to take that 1/2 plus 9/4 plus 25/4. All right, so what I'm doing here is, in order to add fractions, you need to have the same denominator. My last two fractions both have a denominator of 4. And so I'm going to look at that first fraction of 1/2, and I want to change that 2 into a 4 so that I have the same denominator across the board. Well, in order to do that, I'm just going to multiply this first fraction by 2 over 2. And so I'm going to get 2/4 plus that 9/4 plus 25/4. Okay. And then remember, key thing is once again, in order to add fractions, you have to have the same denominator. But when you actually add them, you're just adding the numerators. So 2 plus 9 will give me 11, plus 25 will give me 36 over 4. And 36 divided by 4 is just going to give me 9. So this will be my equation for my circle. And then I'm just going to come up with my center and my radius from that. So remember, for my center here, we're going to look at my h and my k. And whatever signs you currently see in the formula, the equation, we are just going to change them. Okay, so here when I see that -3/2, it's actually going to be a +3/2 in my center. And then when I see that +5/2, I know it's going to be a -5/2 for my center. Okay, in a sense, I'm taking each one of those and setting them equal to 0 and solving for the x and the y. Then for my radius, I'm just going to take the square root of 9 to get that my radius is 3. Remember, in the equation, that 9 is your r squared. So in order to solve for r, you do need to take the square root of it. Then we're just going to come over here and plot that. So we have that 3/2, which is just 1.5. So 1.5, we're going to go over and then down 2.5. So 2.5. Once I've plotted that center, from there, we're just going to count out that radius of 3. And that will put me right here when I go to the right. Here when I go up 3, down 3, and then left 3. Okay, once again, I am going to go ahead and cheat, pause the video, and get a perfect circle here for you. All right, and there you have it. That would be my sketch of this graph. All right, now let's move on to number 3. We're going to do the same thing once again, but we do have, this time around, our equation is going to be 2y squared plus 2x minus 6y equals 45 minus 2x squared. All right, the one thing I want to mention here is just noticing that we still have the same coefficient here. We have a 2, but one is showing to be positive and one is showing to be negative. The reason why is because they're not on the same side. So make sure that when you are doing your division by looking at the coefficients for your quadratic, that you have everything on the same side so that they do have the same sign. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide everything by 2. And like I did in the previous problem, number 2, I'm going to go ahead and group at the same time while I'm doing that. So I'm going to add that 2x squared to the other side and then turn around and divide it. So when I do that, I'm going to get x squared plus x plus my y squared minus 3y is equal to that 45/2. Okay. Then I'm going to, once again, show you in black this unnecessary step that some of you will not want to do, and you don't have to. But we have that completing the square part of it where I'm going to just show you what I'm adding in. Okay, so I have my x squared plus x plus, and then what I'm going to add in to complete that square. Just filling it in later. All right, now let's go back and actually fill in what we're adding into it. So looking at my x coefficient, I have a 1. So I'm going to divide that by 2 and then take half of it. So 1/2. Sorry, not 1/2 of it. I'm going to square it. My bad. All right, then doing the same thing for my y. I'll have that -3. I'm going to take half of it and then square it. And then adding that in to the other side as well. Okay, so now that we have done that, once again, I have those lines just to make sure that I did add in the same thing on both sides, which I did. I'm going to go ahead and simplify. We've got x squared plus x plus that 1/4 plus my y squared minus 3y plus 9/4 is going to be equal to 45/2 plus 1/4 plus 9/4. All right. Now let's go ahead, like we did in number 2. We are going to write out our factors. Remember, don't overthink it just because we see those fractions in the constants areas right here. We are only worried about my coefficients for the x and the y to help me figure out my factors. Okay, so here for my x, I would have x plus 1/2, okay, because 1 divided by 2. And then for my y, I would have y minus 3/2. Now I am going to do a little bit of scratch work once again, just showing you how I'm going to get the number I'm going to get for my radius squared. So starting off, we have that 45/2 plus 1/4 plus 9/4. All right. Remember, we need the same denominator, and so I'm going to take that first fraction and I'm going to multiply it by a 2/2 so that I can get that 4 in my denominator. And so I'm actually going to have 90/4 plus 1/4 plus 9/4, which when you add them together, remember just the numerators, you're going to get 100/4. Well, 100 divided by 4 is just going to give you a radius squared of 25. So now that we have our equation, we can jump into our center. And so my center for this circle will be negative 1/2, positive 3/2. And then for my radius, we would take the square root of 25, and you should get 5. All right, so now let's come over here and plot it. We'll go left 1/2, and then we're going to go up 1.5. Okay, from there, once again, we're going to plot 4 points using that radius of 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the last one. Okay, so once I have that, I can draw my circle. So once again, I'm going to pause it so I can get a nice, pretty, perfect circle. All right, and there you have it. That would be our sketch of the graph for problem number 3. All right, moving on to our very last problem. Okay, we've got question number 4. We have the graph of the equation x squared plus 10x plus y squared minus 4y plus 33 is equal to 0 is either going to be a point or it will be non-existent. Which is it? All right, so looking at what we have, we can ignore step 1, okay, because we have 1 in front of my x squared and my y squared. But moving into step 2, I do need to subtract the 33 to the other side. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get x squared plus 10x plus y squared minus 4y is equal to negative 33. Okay, once again, one more time, I'm going to show you this in-between step of what is happening that you do not have to show, but we're going to complete the square. Okay, so now let's fill in. We'll have half of 10 squared, so 10 divided by 2 squared. Then we're going to have half of that negative 4 squared. And I'm doing the same thing over here. Okay, remember it can be helpful to underline anything you're adding in, even if you're not showing this stuff and you go straight into the next one, maybe underline it just to make sure you have your balanced equation. Because a lot of you, if you were in my class, you were forgetting it. So it is kind of important. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and jump into my step of actually taking half and squaring it. So we'll have half of 10 is 5 squared will give me 25. And over here, we're going to get half of negative 4 is negative 2 squared, which will be 4. And that negative 33, we're going to add to it the 25 and 4. All right, so that we get our equation of our circle, we are going to factor. Remember, once again, for the last time, we will have half of my 10, the coefficient for my x, is going to give me a positive 5. And so we'll have x plus 5 squared plus, and then for the y, we're going to have half of that negative 4 is negative 2 squared, so y minus 2 squared is going to be equal to, and then on the other side, we have negative 33 plus 29, which will leave you with negative 4 as your r squared. And so if this here is my equation of my circle, we can determine that this is non-existent. And I apologize if I spelled this wrong. I'm not great at speller, but we have non-existent, and then we can just say because, just always justifying it. We have that our r squared is going to be equal to that negative 4. Okay, so there you have it. That is it for this lesson over our equations of a circle, day 2.